Good afternoon. My name is Jerry Spitzer. I'm a JDC board member and past chair of JDC's Archive Committee. I'm pleased to welcome all of you to today's webinar. We're really thrilled that so many of you have joined us this afternoon. First, a quick word about JDC's archives. The JDC Archives holds the records of the JDC since its inception almost 107 years ago. Visiting scholars from around the world come to JDC to look at the records. Journalists come, family researchers, curators, filmmakers, and others use our collection for their research. We also offer fellowships to enable scholars to conduct research in the JDC archives. Our program today, on the leadership of Rabbi Moses Rosen, Chief Rabbi of Romania from 1948 to 1994, and President of the Federation of Communities of Romania. I was honored to know Rabbi Rosen throughout his time at JDC. Rabbi Rosen's leadership will be examined through the perspective of JDC's former country director in Romania, Dr. Feine, and Sandra Seagal, a veteran member of the JDC community of Romania. They will each present. The program will conclude with 20 minutes of Q&A. Please note that your microphones are turned off and we'll take questions via Q&A function. You can send us the questions at any time during the lecture. I'd like to introduce Tzvi Feine, our first guest speaker. Dr. Feine earned his bachelor's degree in social work at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem and received his doctorate from the School of Social Work at the University of Pennsylvania. He's a longtime senior JDC executive since the 1970s who served JDC in Israel and around the world. He served almost 19 years as the JDC country director for Romania from 1988 to 2005, providing the professional leadership for the Jewish community's youth programs, as well as health and social services, with emphasis really on aiding elderly indigent Jews while closely partnering with Rabbi Rosen. Since his retirement in 2010, Tzvi has provided high-level consultation to JDC and various nonprofit organizations. Tzvi will now follow with his lecture. Tzvi, please.
Shalom, and thank you, Jerry. We indeed go back many years working together in Romania and other countries, and it's been 42 wonderful years together, Jerry. It's also great seeing so many partners and friends attending. And thank you all for participating in this session. And thanks to Linda Levy, Isabel Rohr, and other wonderful JDC Archive staff for making it possible. I'm especially glad that my superb former partner and friend in Romania, Sandra Seagal, will be giving you her perspective on this subject. Together, I believe our two viewpoints will give you insights into one of the most colorful personalities in modern Jewish history. Rabbi Dr. Moses Rosen was an outstanding and controversial Jewish leader. He was certainly the best known, and I would say most successful Jewish leader in Eastern Europe during the second half of the 2nd century. Shaika Dan, the famous paratrooper to Eastern Europe during the Holocaust and mover of many Jewish survivors to Israel following the Holocaust, said, and I quote, "If there had been 5 rabbis like Rabbi Rosen in Eastern Europe during the communist era, Jewry there would look very, very different." Our own former JDC Executive Vice President, Michael Schneider, observed that had there been several other leaders like Rabbi Rosen in the communist countries of the former Soviet Union, the survival of the Jewish communities there would have been much more successful. So how did he pull this off? What kind of leadership did he exhibit? What qualities did he bring to his position? And what were some of his successes and failures? I'll try to address this concisely and draw some conclusions. So, who is Rabbi Rosen? Some of you who are participating in this webinar today knew him and interacted with him on behalf of JDC. Many of you know little about him. So let me give you some context. Prior to the Holocaust, the Jewish population of Romania numbered over 800,000. Some 50%, over 400,000, were murdered during the Holocaust in every possible way. Throughout the difficult period that followed under a deeply repressive communist government, the rabbi's skills as a leader sustained the local Jews. He played a supporting role in the highly successful immigration to Israel and to other Western countries of 97% of the surviving community. He was their revered leader and truly the shepherd of his flock. Many of us believe he achieved a unique equilibrium of being a loyal citizen, including membership in the Communist Party, and a politician, a member of a deputy in the Romanian parliament, while at the same time remaining an observant Jew, faithfully leading the Jewish community, local Jewish community, and partnering with JDC and the Jewish community in the West. In 1949, JDC was expelled from Romania, and as well it was for almost all other Eastern Bloc countries. Together with help from JDC and its partners, Rabbi Rosen engineered its return in 1968 to Romania, the very first Jewish community in an Eastern Bloc country to be directly served by JDC after 1949. JDC's Mo Levine, Ted Fader, and Cecile Mizrahi admirably led these efforts. Compared even to other countries in the bloc, the situation of elderly Holocaust survivors in Romania was terrible. Many Jews were impoverished, and the return of JDC made a huge difference to their ability to survive. Indeed, I once asked the rabbi how poor Jews had fared between 1949 and 1968 during the organization's absence from the country. And his quiet response was, many of them died. So he did something incredible, which no other Jewish leader had achieved. He brought JDC back in an official capacity to work in Romania and serve the Jewish community. JDC created, together with the Federation of Romania, a comprehensive and highly successful social and medical service, and this is to the credit of JDC and Rabbi Rosen. He sustained the central body of FEDROM, the Federation of Jewish Communities of Romania, local Jewish community structures, synagogue activities, and Talmud Torahs, which he successfully negotiated with the communist regime. Together, they provided a framework to reach all Romanian Jews and help them make Aliyah, which the vast majority did. So who was he and what was he like? Let me describe him. Some adjectives are positive: charismatic, wise, master politician, gifted leader, caring for his people, promoting Aliyah, diplomat, Jewish educator, spiritual leader, focused, achiever, tenacious, and strategist. The negative ones, and this is only a partial list, included collaborator with the communist regime, condescending to those working under him and often with his partners, dictatorial, manipulative, and not knowing when to step down or prepare future leadership to replace him. I will try to expand on some of these. Rabbi Dr. Moses Rosen was born to a rabbinical family in Falticen in northern Romania and had rabbinical as well as legal training. He began his rabbinical studies in Vienna. In 1938, barely escaped from the Nazis to Bucharest, where he completed his studies. He served as a Jewish educator and rabbi in Bucharest until he was appointed chief rabbi of Romania, a position he held for 46 years from 1948 until his death in May 1994. Unquestionably, FEDROM was controlled by communist appointed or vetted officials. Because of internal intrigues within the Federation, as well as the communist government's confidence in him, Rabbi Rosen was elected president of FEDROM in 1964. He held both positions of chief rabbi and president until his passing in 1994. I would claim that he performed the most successful balancing act of any Jewish communal leader in Eastern Europe during communist times. His leadership spanned the entire communist era in Romania into the early years of modern democracy in the 1990s, and under a deeply repressive communist government, his skills as a leader sustained and guided the local Jews. So how did he pull this off? In 1965, President Nicolae Ceausescu led Romania into a new political era by seeking closer ties to the West. Due to the chief rabbi's special relationship with the North American Jewish community and the United States government, and the role he played lobbying for most favored nation status for Romania, President Ceausescu granted various concessions to the Romanian Jewish community that were very useful to his regime. These included foremost the return of JDC to Romania in 1968. JDC was the only nonprofit relief organization officially invited to enter and remain in an Eastern Bloc country until the fall of communism in the late 1980s. In return, Ceausescu allowed Rabbi Rosen to have Talmud Torahs and some limited Jewish education for youth, resulting from wonderful choirs singing in Yiddish, Hebrew, and Romanian for the benefit of JDC and Federation missions visiting Romania. Many of you participated in them. Rabbi Rosen often hosted these missions with the choirs during the harsh, snowy winters. They traveled around from one Jewish community to another, an incredible scene. Former JDC President Henry Taub referred to them as Rabbi Rosen's snow job. The poverty level of the Romanian Holocaust survivors was terrible. Thousands of elderly, impoverished Jews who had never established families or whose children had emigrated to Israel lived in shtetls or in poorer neighborhoods of the larger cities. Many lived in horrendous conditions, often in hovels. There was no one to help them besides the Joint. JDC established a competent health and welfare assistance department together with Fedrom, and together they provided a comprehensive program consisting mostly of 8 monthly food packages, life-sustaining meals for them through 8 kosher kitchens, Meals on Wheels, over 20 medical clinics providing medication and home care, home care, 5 old age homes, winter relief to buy wood and electricity to get them through the harsh Romanian winters, as well as limited cash assistance. This was life-sustaining help for elderly Jews suffering from deep poverty. I would say this was JDC at its best. Rabbi Rosen had a close but complex relationship with the Joint. I'll touch on this briefly. Rabbi Rosen was a master of this equilibrium, and JDC, as the Romanian government's window to the West, played an important role. Rabbi Rosen would relentlessly pressure the Joint, its representative, its leadership, and anyone else in order to achieve his goals. He needed to show results, i.e., US dollars to the Romanian communist government. This often created tensions. Under Rabbi Rosen's leadership, JDC was able to help Fedrom meet the basic needs of poor elderly Jewish Holocaust survivors and maintaining Jewish life in Romania during the communist period. Functioning as his community's top leader during communist times, the rabbi had to prioritize and focus on what was most important to meet those goals. Let me give you a few examples and a flavor of his leadership and his balancing act. Rabbi Rosen insisted that all Fedrom employees and able-bodied recipients of welfare programs attend Sabbath services in the synagogue on Friday night. Some of you attended those services when you participated in JDC missions to Romania. Rabbi Rosen fully realized that most Jews in Bucharest did not live within walking distance of the Chorale Temple. They had to travel. He did not want to know how they arrived or how they got home. Thus, Rabbi Rosen was able to maintain an understanding with the Jewish community. While he himself fully adhered to Orthodox practices, He knew that he could not insist on his communities observing all Jewish commandments. The soup kitchens were totally kosher, but he relented on many other requirements. He simply looked the other way. Another example, in the late 1980s, Ceausescu began demolishing many of the historic central Bucharest neighborhoods, including churches, synagogues, and Jewish neighborhoods. Important synagogues had already been torn down. Rabbi Rosen feared that the main synagogue and the temple chorale will also be targeted for destruction. So he enlisted the help of the American ambassador to Romania, senior American Jewish community leader Alfred Moses, as well as others in saving these two particular structures, but he sacrificed other ones. Rabbi Rosen emulated Ceausescu's style, and as leader of his community, required them to refer to him as His Eminence, or in Romanian, Eminența. He was authoritative, a control freak, and treated his own people in a high-handed manner. Once when I discussed with him his dictatorial style, he responded, "Yes, Tzvi, but I'm a good one, right?" That's how he saw himself. The rabbi chose his battles carefully. He usually, I would say almost always won, but he could not win them all. A strong factor in his success as a leader was his ability to prioritize wisely. There were many lessons that I and all of us at JDC learned from him. Let me briefly tell you an anecdote that bears this out. It's one of my best ones. In 1993, I traveled with Alex Sivan, the Director General of FEDROM, to a relatively remote area of southwestern Romania with a few tiny Jewish communities. I didn't get there often. One of the communities we visited on this occasion was Dobreta Târnu Severin on the banks of the Danube. Only 4 Jews were left there, of whom two were being supported by JDC and FEDROM. In the central square of the synagogue, there was but one building, the historic main synagogue. Clearly, Jews had made a major contribution to the city in the past. Besides the synagogue, we visited the Jewish cemetery. We were greeted by the caretaker who lived in the old funeral home. He received only a meager salary, but was given the right to live there with his family and make agricultural use of unused land in return for maintaining the tombstones and their surroundings. This is the way that things were done then by FEDROM to preserve cemeteries in Romania, and they worked. As we were walking with him, next to the graves, we found a very large pig and many piglets in a pen. We were shocked, and Mr. Sivan was extremely angry and determined to remove the caretaker from his post. Indeed, when we returned to Bucharest and visited Rabbi Rosen to report on our trip, Mr. Sivan, very upset, charged into the rabbi's office together with me. Rabbi Rosen calmed him down and asked him to tell the story, which he then did. Then the rabbi asked Mr. Sivan several questions. "Alex, was there very much in the way of undergrowth and trees among the graves?" Mr. Sivan said that, in fact, the situation was very good and there was almost no undergrowth. Rabbi Rosen then asked him about the fence around the cemetery. Was it whole and in good shape? Again, Mr. Sivan replied that it was in excellent shape, but brought the rabbi back to the big problem of the pig. At that point, Chief Rabbi Rosen closed his eyes, rolled them, and said, "Alex Sivan, you never saw the pig. It was not there." Rabbi Rosen realized that the caretaker was the one keeping the cemetery intact, clean, and in good shape, and that he needed the pig to feed his family. Such was the leadership of Rabbi Rosen. Working with Rabbi Rosen during communist times had its own rhythm. As a Romanian citizen, he was obliged to report on any contacts or conversations with foreigners such as myself, my JDC colleagues, and lay leaders. How did Rabbi Rosen maintain his leadership position in balance with the communist government? He reported on what he deemed was necessary and did not for what he felt was not in the interests of the Jewish community, and he got away with it. Let me tell you a small anecdote concerning this. The rabbi spoke many languages, and we were both fluent in Hebrew, so this was our working language. After several meetings in his office, I noticed that he would sometimes switch to English, requiring me to do likewise. I asked him the reason for this, since, by his own admission, his spoken English was far inferior to his Hebrew. He pointed to the large telephone right next to his desk. When I did not immediately grasp his meaning, he pointed again to the telephone, a large one, indicated that it contained a microphone and a recording device. He added quietly, "I want to make it easier for them to listen to our conversation." Later, he explained to me that the Securitate, the Romanian security service, had far more personnel conversant in English than in Hebrew. All our serious conversations took place outside his office. All conversations in his office were for their consumption. This was all part of the game he played so well as leader of the Jewish community with the Romanian authorities and with the Joint. Very often, in order to show the Romanian government that he was pressing the Joint for additional funds to expand the JDC program in Romania and thus bring in additional foreign currency, which was critically important to the regime, this led to conflict. He had to show the communist government that he was procuring something more from the Joint. In the late 1980s, JDC was providing humanitarian aid in the amount of $4,200,000 annually, and Fedrom contributed $1 million. JDC did not want to increase this budget, but holding the line with him could only lead to conflict. The rabbi had to win in order to maintain his stature with the government as someone who could deliver from the Joint and the West and show the local Jewish community what a successful leader he was. Another conflict I had with the rabbi concerned kashrut supervisors for the JDC-supported soup kitchens and old age homes in 1992. The rabbi wanted more and expensive personnel, and my job was to hold the line and resist a budget increase. The rabbi refused to prioritize this from among other health and welfare programs. He wanted more than one serious and local kashrut supervisors. This led to an incredible, prolonged conflict, both with me as JDC's representative in Romania and with JDC's professional and lay leadership in New York. After 6 months, JDC caved in. JDC's Steve Schwager, the CEO in New York, told me that the organization had reached the strategic conclusion that this conflict has gone on too long and was too divisive. They felt that he should not need to quarrel with the Joint for so long. They were willing to increase the budget in order to resolve the matter. Such was the leadership of Rabbi Rosen. Rabbi Rosen rarely lost a battle with the JDC leaders. He certainly never lost one with the JDC country director. Under these conditions, Rabbi Rosen was also resistant to change. Despite pressure from me, he refused to deal with leadership development or any significant training program for Fedrom staff. He considered that a waste of our money. He resisted all these efforts, and after the 1989 revolution, making any significant improvement in the health and welfare program was a huge challenge. The rabbi simply wanted to continue as before and agreed only to minor improvements, but nothing more radical than that. After his death, JDC, together with the new leadership of the incoming president, Professor Nikolai Kajal, and Chief Rabbi Menachem HaKohen, they modernized and revamped these programs to meet the needs of elderly and other needs of the community. Under their leadership, bringing about change became much, much easier, and major improvements were made in the quality of JDC-supported programs. An example was creating the Informal Jewish Education Program headed by Sandra Seagal, utilizing wonderful Jewish Service Corps volunteers, a lovely staff, initiating youth clubs, and many other tools for the benefit of the community, with the immense support of JDC leaders Annie Sandler and Tricia Ullman, together with the respective Jewish federations in Tidewater, Virginia, and Kansas City. Also, staff development and training with the Buncher and other JDC programs used modern techniques to improve all their services. Fedrum's Health and Welfare Department is an exemplary one. While Rabbi Rosen was careful to maintain excellent relationships with JDC's lay leadership, he occasionally got carried away and unintentionally insulted them. On one occasion, he did this to Mr. and Mrs. Eugene Ribikoff. Gene was then chairman of Eastern Europe and later JDC's president. But when I confronted him, he apologized and immediately brought flowers to the hotel room and escorted them personally to the airport. In December 1989, the communist dominance of Romania came to an abrupt end. They had by far the most bloody revolution in all of Eastern Europe, transitioning from communism to democracy. It cost almost 1,000 lives, including 3 Jews. Rabbi Rosen had managed so well during communist times, but now the beginning of democracy was new and strange for him. Let me tell you a few stories about his transition and his leadership and JDC's help. Right after the December 1989 revolution, there was much controversy among the Romanian public concerning Rabbi Rosen's leadership, which led to an enormous deterioration in the sense of security of the Romanian Jewish community. There were many in Romania who accused him of collaborating with the communists and only looking out for his own community at the expense of the general public. JDC carefully strategized about how to strengthen the leadership of Rabbi Rosen during those times of transition and restore the confidence of the Jewish community in their ability to continue to survive there. JDC realized that it needed to help Rabbi Rosen through this crisis and help him maintain his leadership and high prestige as the country's transition to democracy. JDC, together with the Central British Fund, now known as World Jewish Relief, sent huge shipments of much needed food, medication, and medical equipment to Romanian hospitals serving children. This was nationally televised, given major publicity, and featured Rabbi Rosen. Secondly, JDC, together with JFNA, helped engineer many missions of Jewish leaders visiting Romania with major media attention to Chief Rabbi Dr. Moses Rosen. Most importantly, JDC invited the Standing Committee of the Conference of European Rabbis to convene in Bucharest. We funded it. Rabbinical luminaries, such as the world-renowned Chief Rabbi of the United Kingdom, Lord Emanuel Jacobowitz, together with all the chief rabbis of Europe, were received by the new president of Romania, Mr. Ion Iliescu, and Prime Minister Mr. Petru Roman. Rabbi Rosen stood at the forefront, together with Michael Schneider and myself, at the Cotroceni Palace in Bucharest. For 2 days, this was the major news item covered by local and national media. The Romanian public, which is a very religious or Orthodox one, they witnessed all these eminent Jewish religious figures lauding the Romanian chief rabbi at press conferences, on national TV and radio, and in the newspapers, praising his leadership. This helped enormously to allay any criticism of him by also bolstering the confidence of his community. We succeeded. Lastly, Rabbi Rosen was challenged by the transition from Romanian communism, with which he had managed his leadership so well to the beginnings of democracy. In early 1988, on behalf of the Joint, I brought from Jerusalem a large hanging to cover the rostrum of the Temple Chorale in Bucharest. Many of you have seen this. This was placed prominently on the bima for any visitor to see in time for the important ceremony that was going to take place there to commemorate the 20th anniversary of JDC's return to Romania in October 1968. The text, emblazoned in 3 languages, Romanian, English, and Hebrew, on the hanging included the phrase, "the Socialist Republic of Romania." After the revolution, I repeatedly asked Rabbi Rosen for permission to change this phrase to Romania, because American visitors were asking why the word socialist was still linked with the name of the country when it's no longer under a communist regime. However, the rabbi avoided the subject, and it took 15 months of my persistent pressure to persuade him to consider changing it. Before finally agreeing, he said, "Fine, you are young. I have seen many revolutions, or what appear to be revolutions. The communist rule in Romania may seem to you to be over, but I'm not sure. Wait a few more months." Until his death, he remained unconvinced that the communist rule was truly over. In the end, he did agree to change the wording, but he was somewhat out of his element with the new regime. The balancing act that he had managed so adeptly was no longer really necessary. Still, until his death in 1994, he was definitely the leader with huge prestige, both within the Jewish community throughout Romania and worldwide. History will show that he was an incredible leader of his community and that he did what he had to do in order to maintain the necessary balance. His first loyalty, I believe, was to the well-being of the Jewish community of Romania and to protecting his flock. Everything else he did, manipulating, collaborating, fighting, and acting like a dictator, just as Ceausescu did, was designed to provide the necessary leadership for the Jewish community during these exceptionally difficult times. He was a Jewish educator and a skilled spiritual leader. You may not know, but he willed all his estate to create the Rabbi Moses and Amalia Rosen Foundation to help publish books and manuscripts of Jewish learning from the Middle Ages, going back to his Jewish roots. I believe that much more will be written about Rabbi Rosen and his leadership based on Jdc's archives and his own archives, which are housed at the Bar-Ilan and Tel Aviv universities. These and dissertations will be written, many more dissertations will be written about him. May his memory be for a blessing. Thank you.
Thank you, Tzvi. Thank you very much. Our second speaker today, Sandra Seagal, is a veteran member of the Jewish community of Romania, she currently resides in Bucharest. She is an electrical engineer by training. Following her retirement after the 1989 revolution, she attended various Jewish cultural courses and JDC-sponsored development programs. In 1998, she was appointed Director of Youth and Leadership Development for the Romanian Jewish Federation and served in that role until 2007. Sandra witnessed Rabbi Rosen's leadership during communist times and after the revolution. Sandra will now give her presentation. Sandra?
Rabbi Rosen has been the most important religious and political figure of the Romanian Jewish community for almost half a century, during his awful communist years and the very beginning of the following era. And yet, he was not a loved leader. Why? Jews didn't love him because of his support to the detested communist leader of the country, Nicolae Ceausescu, and kept comparing him to his predecessor, Chief Rabbi Alexandru Shafran, who had had to flee the country to avoid being imprisoned by the communist regime. Non-Jews didn't love him, not only because he was a Jew, but also and especially because of his vehemence in fighting anti-Semites, whoever they were, and reminding them that half of the Romanian Jews, 400,000 people, had been killed during the Holocaust. Nevertheless, he was unanimously respected and got a lot of outstanding awards. Why? To explain this, I must speak about his relationship with the Jewish community, and for this, allow me to choose a very typical Jewish family, which I happen to know very well, because it is my own. My grandfather built a synagogue in Bucharest. My father also built a synagogue in Bucharest. Then why did my father never attend the synagogue? When I finally wanted to ask him why, he was no longer here to answer. As for me, though I have spent my whole life in a very comfortable house in the very center of the city, I am a child of the Holocaust. That means that very early I realized that Jews, people without a country, were not considered normal human beings, and that I was a Jew. The end of the war brought infinite happiness and hope, not only to the two mature children that we all were at the time, but to all the Jewish Romanian community. My parents were dreaming of a world, of a life of work and peace in a civilized world. Their dream didn't last long, about 2 years, after which, step by step, the communists grabbed the power and held it for half a century. My father refused to join the party and paid the price. From being head of his own building company, he had to become a simple employee as all private enterprises were liquidated. Our house was nationalized. In the very apartment we were living in, we had to share the space with two other families with only one bathroom and one kitchen for 3 families. Our life for 30 years was a series of scandals, trials, and denunciations. 30 years. My father was beaten and found no justice as he was the former landlord. Because of our nationalized house, my average grade at school was lowered, and I heard I had the worst conditions to enter the university. In time, all our relatives had to leave Romania. Letters and phone calls were carefully censored. Traveling abroad was strictly forbidden. We were cut out from our world. This happened to many Romanian citizens, not only to us, not only to Jews. The word Jew was never officially pronounced, but it was twice more difficult for people with family abroad, and which Jew didn't have family abroad. I want to apologize if I seem to speak more about myself than of Rabbi Rosen, but I am a typical representative of my community. I am not an encyclopedia. I'm not giving you details about his life. I'm just the eyes who looked at him and want to make you understand what they saw. The more important a person was, the more they had to be crushed if they didn't conform to the party's line. I'm thinking of the Jewish community's secular and religious leaders, Wilhelm Filderman and Chief Rabbi Alexandru Shafran, who had heroically fought for the community's survival during the Holocaust. The Jewish population, and not only they, had a very high regard and trust for them. And as they refused to become the regime's obedient puppets, they were in great danger. To avoid prison, or even worse, they both had to flee the country. Of course, deluded by the promise of equality of all citizens under the law, some Jews were communists. Some were even fanatic communists, but most of them were merchants, artisans, doctors, lawyers, bankers, and industrialists. Which of them could have liked a communist society? None. The new regime needed loyal servants in all areas, including the religious one. Long before Chief Rabbi Shafran's forced departure, it was known that the future Chief Rabbi was going to be a young communist rabbi, Moshe Rosen. And Chief Rabbi he became. And the confused Jewish community, whose members had just lost their belongings as well as their means of existence, learned with amazement that their new Chief Rabbi was all the time and everywhere thanking the party for the Jews' happy and flourishing life. I told you this to explain why very committed Jews like my father didn't want to be involved in the community life anymore. As for Rabbi Rosen, He continued praising the party and his leaders. He praised it in the temple and in newspapers and in interviews in Romania and all over the world till the end of the communist regime in December 1989. The young rabbi that he was at the beginning had to weigh between a Jewish community who didn't like him and a totalitarian regime that officially wanted to suppress religion, all religions, not only ours, and unofficially didn't like Jews, whether religious or not, and a newly appointed secular leadership of the Jewish Federation, totally devoted to the party and determined to apply the party's line, that is, to agree to the community assets becoming the property of the Romanian state, to consider religion as a superstition, give up Romanian Jewish traditions, and most of all, to fight Aliyah by any means, from describing Israel in the worst possible way to horribly persecuting those who ask to leave Romania. Due to his intelligence in diplomacy, Rabbi Rosen became in time the unique and undisputed leader of the Jewish community in Romania, chief rabbi, president of the federation, and a deputy in the parliament. This is what he represented for me when, in the 60s, I started attending the choral temple. I knew that he was a devoted servant of the hated communist regime, but who wasn't at the time? Because those who weren't had already been imprisoned or killed. I knew that his praise gave the regime legitimacy in the eyes of those who should have known the truth about our life, the Western leaders from whom we were vainly waiting for help. Later on, I knew that he was bringing Romania the status of most favored nation, which was somehow helping the country, but was especially strengthening the position of his hated dictator, Nicolae Ceausescu. But nevertheless, I went to the temple because I wanted to listen to Rabbi Rosen's speeches. Be it Hanukkah or Purim or Rosh Hashanah, he always succeeded in linking the meaning of the feast with the most stringent and actual problems of the Jewish community, and he did it in such a clever way that the temple was overcrowded. After I started working as an engineer and got married and had a child, my attending the temple became more and more rare. I didn't do this willingly, but I was so tired I couldn't find the time or strength to attend. It is difficult to explain to people leading a normal life how I had to work 6 or 7, I repeat, 7 days a week, at least 8 hours and a half a day at my office, waiting twice a day, a very long time at the bus station, while my car was uselessly waiting at home, private cars being forbidden to drive in winter. To feed my family, I had to spend the long hours standing in a line for meat, milk, toilet paper, anything and everything. I had to take care of a household, sometimes in unbelievably hard conditions, without heating during the winter, when there was minus 20 or 30 degrees outside. The regime had succeeded even to enter our beds, because every family had to have 4 children, and contraceptives didn't exist. Many women died trying to get an abortion in primitive conditions, or got imprisoned, as well as the doctors that had tried to help them. So I was not only exhausted, I was not very eager to hear Rabbi Rosen praising the regime who obliged me to lead such a life. But by praising the regime so much, inside and outside the country, Rabbi Rosen had won a certain status in the eyes of the praised ones. This allowed him, in time, to obtain a lot of advantages for the Jewish community, advantages that were forbidden for Jewish communities from other socialist countries. For the young ones, All the important communities had Talmud Torah courses and choirs. Much later, Rabbi Rosen once told me that the aim of these choirs was not only to entertain from time to time, but also to offer young Jews a possibility to get acquainted, to befriend each other, and to make a Jewish marriage. Those former children are now adults living in Israel, Romania, or elsewhere, but their friendship still lasts, and this is due to Rabbi Rosen. In a period of starvation, Jews could obtain some meat by pretending they were observant and needed kosher food. People in need had help, big food or medical treatment. This unbelievable help was due to the reappearance in Romania of the universal savior, the joint, and this reappearance was possible not only because the joint wanted to help, but also because the Romanian communist regime allowed it. And this was due to Rabbi Rosen's diplomacy. In other socialist countries, the joint had no access. I must stress the fact that Romania was the only socialist country to maintain relations with Israel after the Six-Day War, and again, we can still wonder what was Rabbi Rosen's contribution to this. He maintained an acrobatic balance between his praising and helping the party, while ensuring the continuation of a Jewish life in the communities. Each time he brought from outside some economic or political advantage for Romania, he obtained a reward from the communist leadership. The most important reward being a certain number of Jews receiving permission to leave the country. This is how most of the 400,000 Holocaust survivors left Romania. As Rabbi Rosen later told me, I have made a Shah Aliyah. In Yiddish, Shah means silence. As for the elderly Jews who ended their life in Romania, then and now, their salvation was and is the Rosen home, where rich and poor find a heaven of help and care. Thinking of Rabbi Rosen's efforts to attract all the members of the community, I must mention the literary Sundays from Popasoare. In the building on Popasoare Street, each Sunday, you could listen to the most interesting conferences or debates. This is how I met lots of brilliant Jewish intellectuals, lecturers, and listeners, and this is also how I started having personal talks with Rabbi Rosen. This happened in 1992, after I had the chance to attend a course of Jewish history and civilization at the Spiro Institute in London. On my return, I told the rabbi, I received, now it is my turn to give. If you think I might be useful in any way, please tell me. He looked at me doubtfully and replied, you say you learn Jewish history? Come and get enrolled in the conference list. After my two first conferences, he asked me to become a member of the leadership of the Federation. Afraid of his reputation as a despotic tyrant, I refused, but I was, and still am, tremendously proud of his offer. His last years were a kind of apotheosis, and he spent them fighting to keep the rest of his community on a Jewish path. I shall never forget him speaking about a Pintele Eid, the spark of Judaism buried in the heart of the most assimilated Jew. I shall always miss the collective seders he organized as a community, his unforgettable comments on the Haggadah, linked to our present daily life as if they had been written the day before. I shall always see him in his glory, surrounded by lots of people he dominated with his iron will and brilliant intelligence. I can't say it was his intelligence. I must say it was God or fate. He left the stage just in time when there was no more place for tyrants. And the new leaders had at least to pretend they had heard about democracy. The last time I visited him, it was a rainy, cold, late autumn day in 1998 in a cemetery in Jerusalem. No glory and no people, just silence and loneliness. Farewell, Rabbi Rosen. You were a great man.
Hi, thank you very much. They were two fascinating talks by Sandra and Svi. It was really moving, and I know it because I spent a lot of time in Romania. I knew Rabbi Rosen, and I must tell you, I'm first generation. My father's Romanian, so it was really it's inspiring, but really historical, which most people don't know about the things that went on with Rabbi Rosen. Having said that, we're going to open it up for questions from the floor. It's just a reminder that your microphones are turned off, and we will take questions via the Q&A function. So where are we now? Okay. Michael Trazen, how might you describe Rosen's, we mean obviously Rabbi Rosen's relationship with Filderman? So, and then there's another question. The Jewish Romanian diaspora in America was supportive of fellow Jews in Romania pre-1940. What about in the 80s till now? Do Romanian Jews in America play a special role supporting Jewish needs in Romania? Why don't we, Svi, do you want to answer this and what's going on? Or on the other hand, Sandra, you're living in Bucharest at the present time. I don't know if you know what's happening in the other parts of the world, but let's. So.
Well, let me say something about the support of former Romanian Jews living in the United States. In the 1980s, yes, I encountered groups of Romanians wanting to help and lobbying the joint in different ways, and here and there providing some support. Sometimes it was medication, other times of particular projects. There was some support, but we encouraged them to support the JDC programs through the federations, through the United Jewish Appeal, and in that way to help us get our job done. But definitely there was support. As for Filderman, I'm no expert on it. I mean, this is a very an amazing man who was also the head of the Jewish community during the Holocaust, representing the JDC, but he also had to leave. Sandra, would you like to add anything to that?
Yes, Filderman had been colleague with Antonescu, the former leader of Romania during the war. And in this way, he obtained some advantages for the Jewish community. He risked a lot. He asked very many things from Antonescu. And at the end, toward the end of the war, he was sent to Transnistria, the extermination camp for Jews from Romania. He was saved due to the efforts of the international Jewish world and of the Red Cross. He came back to Romania, and when the communist regime took the power, they arrested him several times, and he had to flee. He ended his life in Paris.
Another question. Somebody asked the question, well, this one is anonymous. It just says, comment, I think that Rabbi Rosen facilitated Aliyah to Israel by mediating transfer of money from abroad to the Romanian government, essentially selling Jews. I don't know what that really means. Are you familiar with this at all, Tzvi?
Yes, we are familiar with this. This is a whole story, the whole issue of ransoming the Jews. Books have been written about this. The current Romanian ambassador to Israel, is a former member of the Holocaust Museum staff. He wrote a book on the ransoming of the Jews. Much has been written about it. I won't speak about the JDC role. There was a role. Definitely federations, definitely the Israel government, the Nativ, the organization headed that was Sheikh Adam was involved in. But let me give you one anecdote, which I think will directly answer the question. I once asked Sheikh Adam, the paratrooper who I quoted before, who was the architect of what you just asked about, of transferring money and doing what he did. I asked him, what was Rabbi Rosen's role in this? Did he really facilitate the Aliyah? His answer was, well, not exactly. The other organizations that I just mentioned were the ones, but without Rabbi Rosen, there would never have been Aliyah. I asked him why. He says, because Rabbi Rosen managed to keep up the network of Jewish communities in Romania, have the Talmud Torahs, have the synagogues operating, having Jewish life taking place. That way we had a network and we were able to get at the Jews, and without Rabbi Rosen, we never would have succeeded.
Here's a question for you, Sandra. Question is, would you say that Rabbi Rosen was similar in terms of support for his community and collaboration with the communists with his contemporary patriotic work and his involvement with the Romanian Orthodox Church? Was Rabbi Rosen a socialist in his convictions like Mariana? Sandra?
Yes.
You feel comfortable answering?
He collaborated with the regime, and he was in a very good relationship with the head of the Christian church. And they both tried to obtain better conditions from Ceausescu, the leader of the country.
I see. Could we, maybe you know this, could you elaborate on the help provided by JDC through Rosen's Jewish Federation to the Holocaust survivors in Romania? When it started, under what form, to what extent it was similar to other support programs in communist states?
It was very different. In other countries, with the possible exception a little bit of Yugoslavia, JDC only had indirect involvement. There were some intermediary organizations in other countries, such as in Poland and in Hungary. We had access, but the only country that we had official standing with the government and we were allowed full access to all the programs, to all the communities, was definitely Romania. It was the only country that JDC was permitted to actually help create a very comprehensive service. So let's say in Poland, you could have, let's say, a medication program or maybe a soup kitchen, but no comprehensive program, no social service. So I would say that Romania was unique. It was far-flung, well-managed, and I would say very, very successful. And no other country had that. No other communist country had that kind of a service.
Okay. What is the population? I don't want to guess at it. I think I know it, but what's the population today of the Jewish community, not just in Bucharest, but in all of Romania?
As a last as a last counting in 2011, there were officially 3,111 Jews, and about 1,000 of them died meantime. So theoretically, we must have about 2,000 Jews, but this figure may be higher because some people don't declare themselves as Jews. And there are some Israelis who came and are working. They have business now in Romania. It is
I
very
see.
difficult to give an exact figure, but officially there must be about 2,000.
Let me just agree with Sandra. First of all, the census does not really take, there are many Jews who don't identify as Jews and not included in the census. They may consider themselves other. And also there are many Jews who are just not known to the Jewish community. There have been, I would say there are quite a few, not to mention the Israelis that Sandra mentioned. So whatever the census figure, we never accepted the census figure. We always realized that we were talking about a larger number.
This is just the official figure I gave you.
Yeah, exactly.
Zvi, at the present time, well, I guess, Sandra, you might know it better. You know, the economic situation in Romania today for the Jewish community has improved a bit. Has there been, you know, there was property restitution that we were involved with over the years. And Romania had some properties we were able to get back and so on. Do you know what the economic situation of the Jewish community? We have very few people, but are they self-sustaining at the present time economically? You live there, so what is your feeling about it?
Most of the Jews who are still living in Romania are rather old, and people who are retired live very, very difficultly. I don't speak about luxury or trips. I'm just speaking about the daily life. It
I
is
see.
very difficult to be able to buy food and medicines. And the medical care especially is a very, very big problem. Of course, there are exceptions, people who have children abroad or who are helped or by someone, but most of them are in a very bad situation due to their age and due to the general economic situation of Romania. You probably heard about it.
Let me agree totally with Sandra and just add that in addition to the JDC today and the Federation, the Claims Conference is playing an extremely important role today in Romania, helping elderly Jews, primarily with home care, but far beyond that. And also the restitution of Jewish communal property has also been very, very helpful, despite the very difficult realities that Sandra is very correctly pointing us to.
Sandra, this one you could answer. I know her. I knew it's Nancy Hackerman asked this question, and it's about COVID. What's happening with COVID in Romania today?
Romania seems to be the worst situation from the whole continent. People didn't want to get vaccinated, and we have a very, very high rate of deaths. It's a very bad situation. No, not enough hospitals, not enough doctors, and people who didn't get vaccinated.
No, but Sandra, is it available and nobody wants to take it, or the vaccines are not available in Romania?
No, people didn't want to get vaccinated because there are many, many ignorant people, and they were afraid that the vaccine would be worse than the disease.
I see. And another question is, it's a short one, so let me ask you, do Jews today face discrimination when they try to enroll in university studies?
There is no discrimination.
There is no.
No.
So a Jew in Romania who declares himself a Jew and he wants to study at the university, they wouldn't keep him out because he's Jewish.
No, now absolutely not. Absolutely not. There are so few Jews in Romania, you can't even speak about discrimination at the university. Most of the Jews who are still in Romania are old, and the very young ones want to leave the country. There are many Jews who come from outside Romania to study in Romania because it is cheaper for them than in other countries. I personally know many cases.
Okay, let's see some other questions that we have here. There's no problem then for Jews to leave Romania today. Somebody just wanted to leave, and there's no problem. If a country wants to take them, Romania would allow them to leave.
It is absolutely no problem. Anyone who wants to travel can travel, to leave the country definitely, or to go for a trip. It is not a problem anymore.
Let's see what else we have here. We're going to try to answer some more questions here. In Yas, there's a question here in Yas. In your experience, how much did Rabbi Rosen memorialize in Yas the pogrom, Iron God atrocities? Did the Romanian public acknowledge the persecution of Jews?
The Yash pogrom has been commemorated every year.
So,
but during the communist regime, it was not commemorated as it should have been done, because they didn't speak about Jews killed. They said about 500 persons killed, when there were 12,000 Jews killed in one day. So the commemoration took place, but not as it should have been during the communist years.
I personally participated in a number of those ceremonies together with Rabbi Rosen, and every year he made a point of appearing he made every effort to appear in those ceremonies.
Well, I'm looking here time-wise. I think we're out of, let's see, another question, and I think then we have to call it. This is somebody that sent a note, and he said, when we visited Bucharest and when I was asked by our tour guide how many Jews lived in Romania, she told me that all of the Jews left during the war and moved to Israel. She didn't have any idea of how many were killed. She didn't talk about that. Is this common among young people? Now I have here, JDC would like to archives. Type an answer.
Let me just say that the one of the largest contingent of Olim to Israel are from Romania, 320,000. So we're talking about a very large number. And as we said, 98% of the Jews of Romania have left or more.
So we don't have time for any more questions, but I'd like to make closing comments here. That first of all, to thank both of you. I hope all of the people who were on enjoyed the program. It's fascinating. History is fascinating. And what's really fascinating about all of this is that most, if not all, of what was given today by Tzvi and by Sandra are actually in the JDC archives. You know, some personal feelings, of course, are not, and side comments, but everything is in the archives. And so I hope you enjoyed the program. Our next webinar is the Helen Memorial Lecture, which will take place on December 7th. And at this lecture, Dr. Susan Gilson Miller will present her new book, Years of Glory, Nellie Venator and the Pursuit of Justice in Wartime North Africa. It's a terrific program because this is the first program of our series that speaks about Jewish women in turbulent times, the changes, the challenges, and the opportunities, which will raise a number of questions about Jewish women's leadership and resilience in communities throughout the world during the 20th century. Invitations for this will be sent, and you'll be able to register for the program via the JDC Archives and Facebook page. I feel honored to have been able to chair this. And as closing commentary on the JDC Archives, I know we said it at the beginning, this is a phenomenal collection of Jewish history going back for JDC's time in 107 years. It's unbelievable at the number of scholars and others that come to study about what's going on. And we are probably the largest archival material on Jewish history anyplace. So again, thank you very much for attending. It was a pleasure. Have a good day, and we look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you both.
Thank you.